Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, May 6, 2025. It is 1 o'clock, and this is a special meeting of the Jefferson Public Utility District Board of Commissioners. My name is Jeff Randall. I'm president of the board and calling this meeting to order. Jefferson PUD will be offering both virtual online meetings as well as in-person meetings unless advance notice is provided. Online participant audio will be muted upon entry. Please unmute at the appropriate time to speak. And if you're calling in, use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise a hand to request to speak. So let's do a roll call. I'm Jeff Randall, Commissioner for District 1 and President of the Board.
Kenneth Collins, Commissioner District 2.
Dan Tupper, Commissioner for District 3.
Okay, we're all here. So today we have a special meeting that will run to a little bit before 4 o'clock. And we have basically 3 items on the agenda. The first one is executive session that I requested. And FCS won't be ready until 1:30. Whoop.
He's on there.
Okay, Sergey will be there. So I'm thinking the executive session may take 20 minutes. I don't know, Melanie or Joel, if you think we need more time than that.
20.
20 is fine. Okay. And then,
Frozen?
yeah,
Battery's awful steel.
yeah. Joel, can you hear us?
I can hear you. It does look like I'm frozen there, though. Can you hear me?
As long as it's otherwise working. So people in the audience, we're going to start the rate study about between 1:20 and 1:30. We're going to have an executive session first, which will go in another room and you can't participate in that. And then we have a BPA contract review, which will presumably start around 3:15 or something, or 3, whatever. Okay. All right.
So I'll make a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor of approving the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. All right. So I propose we have an executive session for 20 minutes, and it is per RCW 42.30.110, subsection 1, subsection G, to evaluate the qualifications of a candidate for public employment, including executive positions. We are now going into executive session. All right, it is now 1:23, and we have completed our executive session. And the next item on the agenda is the FCS rate study. Kevin, you want to start us?
I do want to start with a big thank you to Sergey and Paul for working with staff, putting a lot of stuff together. We think we're getting close to having things ready for the board to start making some decisions and give final direction to FCS. So thank you, Sergey, and we appreciate it. Take it away.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I'm going to share my screen, so please bear with me 1 second. I should be sharing my presentation. Hopefully it is full screen on your computers. All right, well, thank you everybody for taking the time and giving us opportunity to meet with you this afternoon to continue our discussion regarding the electric utility and the electric utility portion of the rate study. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Sergey Tarasov, and Paul Quinn is joining me virtually as well. A quick overview before we dive into kind of the meat and potatoes of the presentation. We're going to start out with a quick refresher. I know we've been meeting throughout this rate update, talking about different elements of the rate study. So we're just going to do a very high level refresher of the prior meetings. We're going to talk about the overall steps that go into the rate study, as we always do, just to keep that consistency and the education going. And then we'll dive into the updated scenario for the revenue requirement that was discussed and requested at the last meeting, and then the cost of service element and the rate design element of the study. Kind of, as Kevin mentioned, getting us closer to the finish line for the electric utility. As always, feel free to ask questions as we go. So in this slide, just wanted to provide you a high-level background. The last study completed was around 2020, finalized in 2021. Since then, we started a quick update of pole attachment fees at the end of 2023 and really dove into the rate study update early in 2024. kind of starting the study with a rate setting fundamentals discussion and the results of the poll attachments in January of last year. Since then, we've been working with staff to develop the analysis and brought forth the initial results of the revenue requirement and talked about the Clean Energy Transformation Act, low-income impacts and requirements on the electric system in November of 24, and then really focused on the different alternatives to help us find a way to support our electric systems capital improvement program, as well as the power cost increases and operating cost increases. During the February meeting, the board did a request for some additional scenarios to give us flexibility in terms of alternative ways to fund our capital program. So we returned in March with 4 separate options to consider. At that point, we had approximately 6 options that we went over in total since kind of February and March time periods altogether. We kind of honed in the March meeting towards one final scenario that we wanted to bring back, which we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes. And that scenario really focused on the type of debt that we're going to be assuming that we're going to be borrowing. And based on that type of debt, how does that impact our capital timing and spending and so on. So the big takeaway from the last meeting that we received was that we wanted to go with RUS borrowing, which usually includes a 30-year term. And based on the drawdown of the loans, it usually comes with a 2-year interest only repayment schedule, which gives the utility a little bit more flexibility and a ramp-up period for the rate strategy that we may be evaluating. So that's kind of the last time we met together in March. Now, just a high-level reminder that a rate study such as this one, a comprehensive one, consists of 3 key analytical steps. Step number 1 is what we've been focusing on till today, which looks at the overall needs of each utility, focusing on the electric utility right now, but we'll be coming back later in the year with water and sewer updates as well. At this point in time, we're not really focusing in which class is responsible for what portion of revenue generation, just making sure that we can meet our needs in total. Next step, which will be focus of today, we dive in deeper and looks at interclass cost allocation, answering the question if cost differences exist to provide service to different customer classes. The good analogy that we always use is that step 1 is identifying how big the pie of costs need to be. Step 2 slices that pie into pieces and assigns those slices to each class of service. And then lastly, step 3 takes the dollar targets identified in the first 2 steps and develops the fixed and variable charges that are assessed to each individual customer class of service or customer on the system. So as a quick refresher, our first step is just going to be a reminder. We're not going to be focusing on the details that we went over the last couple of meetings. Really, this slide will focus on the summary of the new modified scenario that we talked about. If you may remember, we brought back 6 total scenarios, 4 incrementally new scenarios during the March meeting, all ranged in 11% or so rate adjustment level for 2025, followed by various levels anywhere from 5.25% to 11%, depending on various factors such as deferring capital projects, such as timing and shaping of rates. Based on the direction that you gave us in the latest meeting about the RUS borrowing, the term length, and the resulting impacts on the schedule, your staff went back and adjusted the capital just due to the fact that RUS loans do require process and take a little bit of time to apply for. So your staff modified the CIP timing and equipment availability timing to align with the RUS borrowing timeline. And we reran the scenarios to include the 30-year terms, the 2-year interest only payments. So what you're seeing here is a modified scenario summary table that shows you the annual increase that would be needed. In this case, we're able to drop down the increases for the total system before we get into cost of service discussion, but for the total system at about 9% for the first year, and then 6.75% or so for the next 3 years thereafter. Now, for a typical build before cost of service that uses about 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, that's about $12 in the first year and around $10 plus or minus, depending on the year, per month adjustment in the following 3 years. This rate strategy will be able to support the capital plan, which is about $68.6 million inflated to the year of construction over the next 4-year horizon, which does include redundancy and resiliency projects for substation improvements and so on. And we are assuming out of that $68.6 million, we will be borrowing approximately $39 million to help us pay, especially for those larger substation related infrastructure investments.
Hey,
Now,
Sergey,
yep.
very bottom row, it says op and cap ending balance. Could you just say what that stands for?
For sure. Yeah, that was exactly the area I was gonna go to next. The bottom two rows show you the summary of the ending balances for the operating fund and the capital fund. So we're projecting that our combined balances for operating and capital purposes will be slightly below. That's why they're highlighted red than the targets for the utility. And as a reminder, the target for the utility for the operating fund is 90 days of cash and operating expenses, including power expenses on an annual basis. And the capital target is at 50% of a 5-year average annual capital. So we're forecasting out based on the capital plan, based on the forecasted expenses, what would be 90 days or about 25% of your O&M expenses, as well as 50% of a 5-year running average capital improvement program. Now you'll notice that by year 4, we're no longer red, which indicates that based on our projections, if everything comes to fruition, we'll be able to meet our policies. So we're trying to balance rate action and compliance with policies over the 4-year horizon. We're staying a little bit below our targets in the first couple of years, ramping up, and then finally by 2028, we're projecting that we'll be able to hit it. Now, in addition to these cash reserves, the PUD does have access to a $5 million line of credit available in the case of emergencies or for any of those uses. We are not including that $5 million in this updated table. So the figures you're seeing of 13.6 million in 2025 ending balance, this does not include the 5 million. So if we add the 5 million into that number, we would be able to meet our ending balances as well. So that gives us a little bit more contingency and a little bit more reassurance that if we are running a little below projections, we have a $5 million line of credit available to help us on top of that.
Okay, and I'm just going to pause you there to make sure we all got that. So the bottom or the combined target, that's a theoretical number. That's a goal, a mathematical goal of 90-day reserves. And the number above that is your projection for where we'll actually be. The lines in red are red because we're below our theoretical policy goal of 90 days cash, and those numbers don't include the $5 million. So we're all clear on that? Okay, cool. Thank you for just going through that slow.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I do know that I talk fast sometimes, so if I'm going super fast, just let me know.
Okay.
But the takeaway is that this rate schedule doesn't put us at our 90 days if those are accurate. So that's just to say we're lowballing what we think we need with this rate schedule.
We're below our.
Right, combined targets. So if we are looking at, and I'm just going to pull it up on my end just to confirm, if on the operations purposes, for operating purposes, we'll be making the 90-day target starting 2026. It's just that we're going to be below our capital target. So on the combined, because you don't really separate your cash that way, we are looking at it on a combined basis.
Okay, please continue.
Okay, so this is kind of the one scenario that we're focusing on that we needed some guidance on that will help us inform the next steps of the analysis, which will move forward to the cost of service component. So first, we're going to do a quick round of just again, refresher education. What is cost of service? Because it does get a little confusing, and it's always a good idea to set the stage first, and then we'll talk about results as we go through the discussion. Now, again, as I introduced it a couple of slides ago, the fundamental question really what we're trying to answer with this step of the overall study is to answer the question if there are differences to provide service to a residential customer versus a commercial customer, general service, and so on. Do differences exist? There are industry accepted practices and methodologies to perform these studies, but we do use your specific usage information, facility requirements, sizing, infrastructure, data to develop the analysis. And in addition to that question, which we sometimes refer to as an equity question that we're trying to answer, we also have some very useful information that comes out of it regarding cost-based unit costs. It kind of informs us what the rates should be if we were to set our rate design on a cost-based unit cost type of an approach. So there are two positive outcomes that can come out of this element of the overall rate study.
Sergey, we got a question.
Sergey, has the fundamental methodology for this cost of service study changed from prior cost of service studies?
No, the methodology remained the same. What we have updated is the latest cost information and latest statistics So the methodology itself remained consistent from study to study. So the main thing that's changing is the cost structure and the usage profiles by individual customer classes.
Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the process itself, when we go through cost of service, we like to simplify it as well from a big picture perspective. We also go through 3 steps, and really it's organization, a group of expenses into different cost buckets. So the first step is called functionalization, where we group the costs into costs related to production or purchase power. The second function is transmission, distribution, and general type of assets and expenses. Once we have gone through that step, we dive in a little bit deeper, and within each function, we classify your expenses. All that means is we try to line up how we incur costs with those costs themselves. Are these costs associated with oversizing of the system for demand purposes? Are these costs associated with purchasing power or energy purposes? Are these costs fixed in nature, don't vary with consumption, or customer type costs? Are there any costs that can be directly attributable to a specific customer or customer class? And then the last step, step 3, we develop basically allocation factors, which in the simplest form, statistics. We look at your aggregated statistics by class, and using those statistics, we distribute these functional cost pools to each customer class. So we'll quickly go over what it actually means and show you some interim step results and compare them to the prior study just to show you how things have changed from study to study. So again, the first step is functionalization. As I mentioned, is just simply arrangement of costs. And ideally, we do that utilizing uniform system of accounts. We do that for both plant infrastructure as well as expenses. And the reason why we do that for plant first is the logic and the allocation process for studies such as these is that the design of your plant infrastructure usually will inform the allocation and how you incur expenses. So depending on how you size your infrastructure, when you maintain that infrastructure, your operating and maintenance expenses will follow the design and of the plant. So in this case, for anything when we refer to production, in case you're interested, it'll be FERC categories or uniform system of account categories 300 to 330 for the plant infrastructure and 500 to 550 for production. These are, again, infrastructure associated with generating or purchasing power that our customers will use. Then we get into transmission, getting that power from the point of generation to your distribution system, distribution infrastructure that gets you to your customer's front door, and then customer related costs that are related to meter reading and so on, as well as meters and services. Now, the reason why we functionalize it is because not every customer for every system will utilize each of these functions of service. Is purely as an example, some customers might take power from transmission, some customers might take power from primary point of delivery versus a secondary point of delivery. So knowing which function applies to which customer or customer class allows us to allocate costs more appropriately. Now, on this slide, we wanted to provide you the results of the functionalization between these 4 functions that we talked about. And we're comparing in this table the allocation of the plant at the table at the top, as well as the revenue requirement at the table to the bottom. You'll notice 2 percentages for each table. The first percentage shows you the result of the current update, and the second row shows you the result of the prior study. So if we focus our attention to the upper table, which looks at the plant and service allocation, we'll see that the general trend of the allocation of assets is pretty close as it was during the last study. There was a little bit of a shift from transmission to distribution, which kind of makes sense. We're predominantly a distribution utility. We don't have our own generation facilities, and we're investing a little bit heavier into substations and distribution networks. So it makes sense it's shifted, and these will change from study to study. With such a small change, again, doesn't give us any significant causes for attention or anything like that. So the trends are the same, about 8%, 9% of your total infrastructure is related transmission, and the rest is distribution. When we look at the second table down below, and we look at the distribution by function of our expenses between the current study in the first row of percentages and the second row, we'll notice there was a pretty big shift between what portion of cost is related to power. It used to be about 33%, and it's now it used to be 42%, I apologize, and it's now 33%. So there was a shift from the last study to this study between how we're incurring costs. And the reason for that is we are investing heavier into our plant. We are increasing how much we're building. We're having a lot more redundancy, resiliency concerns. Those concerns have been amplified because of supply chain cost increases. So in addition to inflation, what we saw magnified cost pressures from shortages of infrastructure. So there has been a compounding impact on the price side. So what this is telling me is that the revenue requirement is gradually transforming to be more driven by demand-related costs and infrastructure-related costs than power-related costs over time. I know it's a big change, so I just wanted to pause here to see if that makes sense, if what I'm saying kind of makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, Sergey, with going into the new contracts and all that, where we're already at, we have very little headroom, and if we're looking at that tier 2 power, have you baked that into this, or how would that impact us if we have to go to tier 2 power, say in a year from now, when these rates are in effect? Could you see it considerably putting us at a disadvantage if we have to use more tier 2 power?
So we have modeled that you will be utilizing tier 2 approximately around 2 average megawatts in the next starting in fiscal year 2026. So that has been taken into account. But the amount of investment that we're projecting you'll need to make into your substations proportionally is greater than the increase in that tier 2 power. That tier 2 power is projected to be only a small portion of your overall profile. And let's say if for some reason you double your take of if you tier 2 represents half of your power profile, that will have a significant impact. If tier 2 is only 2 average megawatts without deviating substantially, it's not going to have as great of an impact as we will see for the investment we'll need to make in our infrastructure in the next couple of years.
So what I'm hearing is you think it'd be negligible.
At this point, proportionally, how much we're investing in our infrastructure, it would be negligible. And again, I'm not talking about the cost pressure. I'm talking about the makeup of your expenses. What proportionality of your costs are related to power versus what proportionality of your costs are related to all other costs.
Correct.
Yeah. So in this case, this will tell us that we are seeing changes in terms of the makeup of our expenses. That means there might be changes coming to how the costs were allocated. So we'll take a look at that, but just keep that in mind as we're going through analysis. If we see changes in one area, most likely there will be changes coming in the results as well in some areas as well. So once we've gone through the functionalization process, we dive deeper and we go through the classification. And again, all classification does is establishes a relationship between how we're incurring expenses and what is kind of a rational representation of those expenses. Are these costs related to the number of accounts we have on the system? Are those expenses related to the energy purchases that we need to make? Or are these expenses related to the oversizing of the system? Now, typically, when we look at classification of costs, we again go granular and group our assets and our expenses in classification cost pools. And from a big picture perspective, there's 3 different cost pools. The first one is energy related, second one is demand related, and the third one is customer related. There could be subcategories, but we'll keep it on a high level from today's purposes. When we talk about energy, all we're doing is grouping expenses that change with the consumption or flow of electricity and usually are measured in kilowatt hours. So again, predominantly power costs are included in this type of a cost pool. When we look at demand costs, these are costs related with the maximum rate of use required at a certain point in time. That could be in a day, that could be in a month, in the billing period, or a year. And the reason why it's important is because we size our infrastructure differently depending on the type of capacity or demand requirements somebody might need. Some customers use their capacity efficiently. They're always hovering at that maximum level of their requirements, and other customers require a lot of infrastructure and they peak a lot, but on an average basis, they don't use up that infrastructure. Well, that bigger, larger infrastructure costs us a lot more money than if we would have just installed a smaller transformer. If we have to install, let's say, 100 kVA transformer, we only, on an average basis, need a 15. That's a significant cost differential. So customers that make us install greater infrastructure and then don't use it still need to proportionally contribute to that larger cost. So this is a very important component of their all cost of service, and being able to identify who's responsible for having us oversize the system is very important. And then lastly, we have customer-related costs. These are costs that don't change with consumption. It doesn't matter if we have a residential customer or a large industrial customer, it's going to cost us the same to read their meter, or to send them a bill, or to use a postage, put a stamp on their envelope. Again, it doesn't matter with the level of energy that they're using. Typically, when we group costs here, we're looking at meter reading, billing, account services, but also include a portion of your backbone system, which means a portion of your transformers, a portion of your wires, conductors, and poles will be recovered through this charge as well. Now, taking a look at the classification process during the initial study of 2020, when we looked at the classification, about 36% of your costs were energy driven, 41% demand, and 23% were customer related. The updated numbers are now 27% energy. So again, a reduction, again, staying consistent with that functionalization finding that less costs are related to power. Well, because the less costs are related to power, proportionally speaking, now less costs are in the energy classification, more costs in the demand classification and the customer classification. And again, the same line of thinking here is that as we're investing greater and greater in our system, we're outpacing how much we're spending on renewal and replacements, redundancy, resiliency of our system, and a little bit proportionally less in the form of the actual cost of power. The last step that we need to go through is allocating those costs or distributing those cost pools to individual classes. And as I mentioned before, we utilize historical and projected statistics to perform this step to create allocation factors that align with how the system was designed. And by that, I mean, we look at numbers and for the classes that we have in the system, we take a look at what proportional share of costs do these customers represent. And we look at various demand categories. So on this slide, you should see 3 demand various allocation factors, 1 energy allocation factor, and 3 customer-related allocation factors. Now, when we compare these factors to the prior study, they're very consistent. The only trend that we're seeing is that residential makes up slightly greater proportionality of these numbers. And the reason for that is because your residential class is the main one that grew from last study to this study, or proportionally grew more than anybody else from a class perspective. So the trends are fairly consistent study to study in terms of the allocation factors, but the proportionalities have changed just simply because one class has grown more than all the other classes. Now, what do these percentages mean? In terms of the impact on the allocation process, if we look as an example of the energy cost pool in the middle, we see that the energy cost pool for the residential class is about 68.6%. So that means for every dollar that's allocated as energy, 68 or 69 cents of that dollar will go to the residential class. Now, inversely, if we allocate a class as customer as number of accounts, a portion of that cost would go about 84 cents out of every dollar will go to the residential class. So as you can see, the prior steps determine which cost pools will be allocated based on these different allocation factors. So what does it all mean? I know there was a lot of talking about the methodology and the approaches. What does it all mean? When we put everything together, what we're really looking at here on this graphic is how does each class represented with a bar, how do they compare to their 100% target of cost of service cost allocation? So usually when we talk about cost of service in the rate setting world, we're going to have a range of reasonableness represented in the chart here with the dashed lines. We're trying to get our customers as close to 100% as possible, not necessarily right on 100%. And we know that year to year, our budgets are going to change. The different portion of the budget might go up, might go down one year to the other. The usage from each customer is going to change as well. It's 1 year based on the seasonality. If we have a mild winter, it might be lower. If we have an extreme event, we might be higher. So we know we have deviations. And when we set rates, we really want to be setting rates on an average. And the average even can change over a long-term horizon as well. So that's why every year when we look at the results, we don't necessarily want to hit the bullseye right on the head, because we know that bullseye is going to move year to year. But we want to be as close to that bullseye as possible. And if we're a little higher and a little lower, it's okay as long as we're trending in the right direction. So when we review these the results, we note that the residential and the general service classes of service are within that range of reasonableness, where the general service class of service is right around that upper bounds of range at about 108%. That means they are paying a little bit more than their pure 100% cost of service, and they're getting close to that 110% mark, but they're still within. Versus residential is a little the opposite. They're paying below their cost of service, but still within that 10% range of reasonableness. If we look at other classes like the demand classes, small demand, large demand, primary, general service classes, what we're finding is that these classes are paying more than their allocated share of costs, and they would need to go down in order for them to get closer to that 100% mark or even that 10% range of reasonableness. And these results are very consistent with the prior study. Lastly, the irrigation class of service is currently underpaying, and they're below their range, and they're below by quite a bit. Again, very consistent to prior study. And then the interruptible schools are now falling outside of the range of reasonableness. The prior study had them right at cost of service, and we'll see that on the next slide. I'll actually just go there. But the current results indicate that they're off. So what I wanted to do on this slide is provide you kind of a side-by-side comparison from the 2020 study to the current update. If we look at the residential class, we're actually made some progress. And if you may remember, during the last study, we created a very, very gradual phase in trying to start the process of moving our classes towards cost of service. So the residential class has maintained or improved on that analysis. The general service class was actually outside the 10% range and has improved as well. So that phase-in has been working. But when we look at the small demand, large demand, and primary classes of service, they actually went into the opposite direction. And the reason for that is because our cost drivers have shifted away from energy into demand. And based on the allocation factors, demand-related costs are a smaller portion of the overall allocation for these classes compared to energy. So as the costs drift away from energy into demand infrastructure, less costs are being allocated to these classes because they're not as responsible for these costs, for these type of cost drivers, or as proportionally responsible as they are for energy usage. Now, when we look at, oh, go ahead.
I just want to do a time check. How much time do you expect you will need to finish your presentation?
I would say another, if I can just go quickly, probably 10 minutes if I ramp up my speed a little bit.
Continue.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second.
The EPA will be here about 2:30 to 3.
Okay.
We got plenty of time.
So we've got time.
Okay. All right. Please
Okay.
continue.
Yeah, do let me know if I'm going too slow. I can definitely speed it up. So the findings here is that the three classes of service are going the opposite direction. The reason for it is because the cost structure has changed. We are seeing that interruptible schools was right in line and went out of line. The reason for that is by policy, they were held constant after the last study at their rates. And because we had rate increases, eventually, as we implemented those rate increases and they didn't change over the last 4 years or so, they eventually moved out of line of that range of reasonableness. So there was a policy consideration taken into account during the last study, and it pretty much did what it was expected to do. They just floated outside of that range over those couple of years. So in summary, the phase-in has worked for the major class of service of residential general service, but because of the cost structure change, there were some deviations for the demand-related customer classes of service. So currently, based on our prior discussion with the board until our current discussion, we're following with the approach of very gradual adjustments proposed onto our class of service consistent with the prior study. What that means is we're proposing to update the phase-in to help us continue moving into the direction of cost of service for every class while trying to mitigate the impacts as much as possible without significantly impacting everybody else. So on this slide, we wanted to provide you a phase-in approach that we've developed. What you're seeing is a table which has the first column labeled 100% cost of service. So what this column does is looks at what the increase would need to be if we were to get to 100% cost of service in 1 year. Now, again, this is not necessarily what we're proposing. This is just information that shows that if we were to be 100% cost based on the analysis we developed, we would need a 13.5% increase for the residential class, and then rate decreases for some of these other classes, as well as a 200% increase for irrigation. Instead of doing this, consistent with our prior policy discussions with the board during the last rate study, we wanted to make these adjustments as gradual and as possible. So for the first year, because it is a higher year of 9%, we're proposing to keep Residential pretty much at the average increase of 9%, including general service. Small demand through large demand, they get a little bit of a savings, 1/4% less than average at 8 3/4. Irrigation and interruptible will be 2% above average at 11, and then the lighting at average. The years thereafter, the same trends are in place, where anybody who needed to go up more than average will be a little bit more than average. The residential will be slightly more than average in this case. General service will be right at the average because they're right on cost of service. Demand classes will be below average, and all the other classes will be catching up, but not significantly more than average, about 0.5% more after that. So again, the proposal is to use the same methodology and approach to gradually phase in cost of service to our classes over time. So this is cost of service. I want to pause here again before switching gears into rate design. Any questions, concerns, comments for this step?
Please continue, not yet.
Okay, great. And we can always come back to this one. So the last step is rate design. And with the rate design, all we're trying to do is collect the dollars based on the targets identified in the first 2 steps. When we are considering rate design, there are competing goals and objectives that we're trying to meet. One of them is being cost causation, kind of those cost-based unit costs. And the other one is policy objectives of the utility, such as conservation, low-income support, and so on. Now, as always, a reminder that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution that'll resolve all your problems. Really, we need to figure out what our objective is and then align the rate structure that would most appropriately help us meet those objectives, be that conservation, be that revenue stability, simplicity, affordability, and so on. So again, there's not going to be one perfect rate structure that resolves all the issues. On this slide, just wanted to provide you a quick summary of your rates. Due to time, I'm just going to go quickly to the next one where we have a comparison of these rates to your cost-based unit costs, and it'll show you the same information. So on this slide, what we're seeing is the upper table shows you the existing rates. There's a column for your basic charges. These are charges assessed on a monthly basis, and they're fixed no matter how much usage you have. The middle portion shows you your energy charges. There's a 3-tiered system for your residential customers. There's a tier for 0 to 600 kilowatt hours at almost 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Any usage above 600 up to 1600 kilowatt hours goes up to about 11.72 per kilowatt hour. And then anything above 1600 goes up to 13 cents, 13.34 cents per kilowatt hour thereafter. All the other classes just pay a flat per kilowatt hour charge, no matter what their level of usage is. You'll also notice that there's a last column that has demand charge component. Not every class currently has a demand charge, but the larger demand-related classes do have a separate demand fee on top of the energy and the basic charges. Now, the second table down below shows you what the cost-based unit costs show the charges should be. You'll notice that, as an example, residential shows they need to be at $46 compared to the $28 that they're at right now. The energy rate, if we were truly cost-based, would be around 4 cents per kilowatt hour, but you'll notice there will also be a demand charge. Now, one item to keep in mind is that just because we don't have a demand charge right now, does not mean we're not recovering demand costs. All that means is that anything that's above our energy charge is recovering what's associated with demand and potentially what's associated with the under-recovered portion of our basic charge. So you'll notice our charges for energy are higher than 4 cents. That's because they have to be higher to recover anything related to demand and anything that we're not able to recover through the basic charge by keeping it lower than the cost-based rate. Now, in addition to looking at resolving our cost of service differences, there's also a couple of items that we wanted to talk about and address with the rate design as well. The first item is related to the residential cost of service, specifically related to the 3rd tier. I think over the last couple of years, you'll notice is that especially during some colder snaps and cold events during the wintertime, a lot of your customers experienced pretty large peaks in their usages, and they had some pretty healthy bills because they exceeded that 1600 kilowatt hours and really went into that 13-cent threshold for their bill impacts. For this time around, we're considering reversing course and condensing our tier structure back into a 2-tier rate system. So we are proposing eliminating the 3rd tier and moving back to a 2-tier block rate structure for those customers. In addition to this change, we're also prepared some time of use based rates for each class of service that we'll provide you at the end of the presentation as well, in preparation for eventual transition as a time of use rate alternative.
Sergey,
Uh-huh.
what's the rationale for eliminating the residential third tier?
It was just based on internal discussions and the observations from your customers. Again, they're seeing a lot of pressure on their bills during those cold snaps. Right now, we don't really have a three-tier structure from Bonneville. It's a tier system. So I guess internally, when we looked at the conservation impacts that we were having from our customers, we wanted to ease up on the impacts to the higher users. Some of that rationale is that a lot of our low-income customers are higher users. So we wanted to be careful who we're impacting with those upper tier usages as well.
Hey, Sergey, I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah.
From staff's point of view, the third tier was really supposed to kind of encourage conservation. And during cold spells, when you need to use the power, it was not for conservation. They had to use the power. That's part of the reason that the directors have talked about eliminating that third tier.
So the question I have, Sergey, you just said that Bonneville doesn't have tiered power, but they do. Because when we go above our tier one allocation, we are potentially exposed to market prices, and oftentimes those market prices will be higher than what BPA power normally is. So I think part of that third tier was also to recognize that we knew we eventually would run out of tier one power, and that's happening now. So I guess could you respond to that a little bit?
So when I said I meant they don't have a three-tier structure. So they currently have a tier one cost allocation and then above rate high watermark purchases. So from a cost allocation perspective, conceptually speaking, there's not a triple tier from Bonneville from that perspective.
Okay, so you do acknowledge that we potentially will, when we go above our tier one allocation, we potentially are paying more if the market.
That's correct.
Okay.
So Sergey, Commissioner Tupper.
Mhm.
So by doing away with the third tier, this is strictly purely a revenue question. The new rates that you're going to propose for the 1 and 2 tiers, you've calculated the amount of revenue we generate off of that third tier on a 3 or 5 year average, I assume, of what that revenue was year over year. And the new rates would capture that revenue or plus inflation in those 2 new rates.
That's correct. Any structure we develop will tie to the revenue requirement and cost of service dollar targets. So just because we have less tiers doesn't mean we're going to collect less revenue. We have made sure that any rate we propose will generate the same amount of money that would have generated with 3 tiers.
And I guess just to put everybody on the spot, do we know that number? How much that third tier generated in revenue over the last, well, how long have we had that rate? Just during this last 4 years? That was the only time we had that third rate, correct? So do we have the data showing what the revenue year over year was during that time? Because it'd be helpful, maybe, if we don't necessarily need it, but just to know that the new rates are going to show that we're capturing that revenue that we've gained in the past moving forward, plus inflation.
So the rates that they're proposing are rates against the cost they've already assigned based on our 4-year work plan and all that. So that's how you can be comfortable. It covers that third tier.
Okay.
Well, I guess the alternative question would be, I realize you're going to propose a 2-tiered rate system. The question I would have would be, okay, well, if we said we didn't want to get rid of the third tier, and presuming that the third tier brings in some extra money, if we kept a third tier system, I'm guessing that it would allow for the 2 lower tiers to be slightly lower than what you've actually proposed.
There's so there's different variations, right? Our first scenario that out of several that we generated, we looked at many different options we reviewed with your staff, and this is kind of the one option because we do have limited time with you for these discussions, but we can generate whatever options available. We are making sure that we can recover all our revenues from these 2 tiers. We can run any kind of option if you want to see something alternative.
So after hearing staff talk about this, I'm more in line with doing away with the third tier because of the spike it puts on low income and other people during peak events or long periods of extended cold or hot weather. and it's more predictable that way. It seems to me that getting rid of the third tier, I would be in favor of that. I get we're giving up the conservation part of it for, customer benefit on the other end on cost.
Yeah, I don't think the research supports that it really influences conservation
Conservation.
anyway. And wintertime, it hits low income people particularly hard. And we're looking at from today to 2028, close to a 40% increase in rates. Yeah, I think we, in terms of our value system as a PUD, we don't want to put people in a position of having to live with a really cold house wintertime because of the cost of electricity and have to make trade-offs such as food or other necessities.
I guess I would be interested when we get to the actual kind of final proposed rates. And I realize, Sergey, this is kind of your first presentation to us of proposed rates. I guess I would be interested in seeing when we're done giving you feedback, what that residential structure would have been if we kept the 3 tiers compared to the 2 tiers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can, yeah, we can provide you with that. We can provide you with that information.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much work that'll take on Sergey's part and what it does to the process, but I don't know that I'm going to see or hear anything in the data moving forward that says we should keep the 3rd tier. And it sounds like Commissioner Collins is in the same camp. So if we're looking for direction, today might be that day just to figure this one out, whether we want to, do away with it or not. Is that fair, or do we have the time to put this off to a further date to determine the 3rd tier?
I have the information from a numbers perspective now. I don't have the impact. So if I go to the next slide, what we're showing you is the proposed rate and the dollar impact. I have what the rate would be already for you today. I can say it verbally, or we can email it after. I just don't have the impacts tables that you're seeing here generated in front of you. So I already have it available, what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So kind of, are we okay to move on to this table, or should we still have any questions to the prior one?
I'd say just keep going and we can bring you back.
Okay, awesome. Great. So what we're seeing here is now focusing strictly on residential class. And what we're trying to do here is using that discussion from the prior slide, we're trying to transition our basic charges towards our cost-based unit cost. So if you may remember, our cost-based unit cost for 2025, and they would increase for future years, is $46.56 for the residential class, while we're charging $28.50. So we are under recovering by about $16 or $18 or so, $18 for the residential class. So similar discussion as we did last time, we're proposing a little bit of an adjustment of about $5 in the first year, and then closer to $3 per year thereafter to the fixed charge. So by the time the 4-year period is over, we're still below the current 2025 cost of service unit cost of $46.53. So we're not proposing to go to 100% cost-based fixed charges, but we are trying to make progress on the fixed charges. The second piece is the energy charge. So you'll notice the current existing tiers are 0 to 600, 6 to 16, 16 plus. The new tiers would be simply eliminating the upper tier, so it'd be 0 to 600, 600 plus. The rates are for these current tiers without any adjustments are 9.6, 11.7, 13.3. In order for us to collect the same dollar amounts, taking into account the $5 increase in the basic charge, they would have to go up to about 10.57 cents and 12.83 cents. If we kept the current structure in place, that rate would go up to 10.34 cents instead of 10.57 cents. So the first tier would be lower. It would be 10.3 instead of 10.5. The second tier would be 12.55 instead of 12.83. And there would be a fourth tier that's 14.28 cents. So the upper tier would be or almost 2 cents greater than the second tier.
And I think I'm seeing right where you and staff are saying, get rid of the third tier because it's getting pretty expensive to
Right.
maintain 3 tiers. Your upper tier would be above 14, 15, 16, 17 cents as you go out in the years. So,
Right.
okay.
So that's kind of the logic behind the change.
Yep. And I mean, you look at this too, by 2026, the second tier would basically be the equivalent of what the third tier is now.
Right. Yeah. Currently, without any rate adjustments.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And I don't know if it would hold the curve or not, but on going up $5, you're basically going up a penny on the consumption side. So every dollar you raise the base rate, it's a 0.2% penny increase on the consumption rates. Is it fair to say that would hold that trajectory, or is it?
I would have to determine because fixed charges are about 80% of your total revenue. Just I believe, well, actually a little bit more. Even I would have to actually double check 1 second from a total
Because the
revenue perspective.
way my thinking is looking at this is people are going to conserve on the usage now. So you may lose, I don't know if you figured this in or not, may lose a little bit of the revenue now by going to the penny more per kilowatt hour in either of the classes. Does it make sense to go maybe a little bit higher on the base rate, the fixed rate, so you know you have a fixed revenue stream? That's the only reason I'm asking that, and that it may be negligible. I don't know.
Right. So right now, yeah, right. If we go a little higher proportionally on the fixed charges, we can reduce the pressure on the energy charges. There will be a little bit, with any of these changes, if we go a little higher in fixed charges, there will be slightly higher increases to the folks using less and a little bit lower increases to the folks using more. So
And the
there's
re-
always that balance that we're trying to keep as well.
I'm looking at that is because again, in 2028, we're still, as you said, what, $6 behind where we need to get to be at, was it cost of service? Is that what that number, the $48 number
Yeah.
was? If we add $1 on the base rate on each of those years, that puts us at 46. We're a lot closer to where we need to be. We're gaining ground on closing that delta over the past 4 years versus 8 years now. And then another 4 years beyond, we may still not catch it. So it seems to me we want to close that gap, that delta now.
So
Go ahead.
go ahead and respond if you had any response to make. Then I had another question.
Well, that's definitely an option. That's where we kind of wanted to keep the balancing act presenting today. This kind of felt consistent to the last rate study direction we received. We can be more aggressive in moving to the cost of service basic charges, but we wanted to start here without having a conversation with you.
So the question I've got, Sergey, is going to be, I think, kind of a challenging one for you. So back in the day, before Jefferson PUD took over electrical service, the residential customers in this county paid about $8
Mm-hmm.
customer charge. Now they're paying 28, and we're proposing to go up to 42 by 2028.
Mm-hmm.
When you calculate that charge, what is your assumption? I mean, how do you break down, what is your assumption in terms of a customer charge on the residential side? Because I'll tell you this, right now, we calculate it by how many residential meters we have.
Mm-hmm.
What we've learned is that there are quite a few customers that have more than one meter.
Okay.
And I can see it from the PUD's perspective of, well, you have a meter and you have the capacity to have this amount of power served to you. But I guess my question is, what is the assumption of what a basic charge covers? And what
So
is getting multiple charges because they got more than one meter?
right. So right now we're developing an average charge per meter for each class of service. And in terms of the type of costs that get allocated into that cost component, there's actually 2 different cost components. There's direct customer costs that are coming in from expenses such as, I'll give you 1 second if you wouldn't mind. Second, as I pull it up. Customer account expenses, those are related to meter reading, manual reads, customer records and collections. That's a pretty substantial one. Customer service information expenses, conservation rebates, as well as the overhead costs associated with that. So that represents, including taxes and everything else, that represents approximately $15 of the 46.56 that we've calculated, $14.50. The other portion of the $46 is about $31 per month, and that's associated with that backbone infrastructure, the infrastructure of recovering of meters, and the physical meter itself, the eventual replacement of the meter and service itself, as well as a portion of the backbone. So the backbone, I would say, just high level, out of that $30, let's say it's about 75% of that $30, just using high level math right now since I can't do the actual calculations. So I would say somewhere in the $20 range is purely backbone. Another $10 range is eventual replacements of the meters and services themselves. And the $15 is related to for customer service, reading the meter, and billing and so on. Does that help answer that question?
A little bit. And I guess this was at a meeting you weren't present at, but we had a customer come to us. I think he's actually in the room today. And he bought a house in Port Townsend that has 3 meters.
Mm-hmm.
Meter on the garage and 2 meters on the house. And it's because the house historically had been a duplex. So it was metered, each side was metered separately. And the house has since been converted back to a single family house. And it's still got these 3 meters. And as we push up the customer base fee, customers like that are going to notice more of their bill coming from that customer base fee. And I guess my question is kind of what is the assumed economic unit of what a customer base fee is? And if I was that customer getting hit 3 times, I would be wondering, how is this right?
Right, that comes to policy discussions as well. So we have our customer costs, as you mentioned. Every meter connected to the system has equal connectivity to the capacity investment and ability to generate the system. Some utilities go the policy route of, well, if it's on one property, we'll only charge them the incremental service. So let's say they don't have a secondary customer bill. There's no postage utility billing being generated. That could have a deduction made and really more fine-tuned granular secondary meter fee can be calculated. So instead of spreading the cost over all meters, kind of having an average charge per meter, some utilities choose to make an exception and deduct some of these components that may not be fully duplicated. So if you truly don't generate a second bill for a second meter, the billing component can be deducted from the metering fee. It seems, the backbone component of the cost should be allocable based on your capacity available to each individual meter. And that seems reasonable. But again, those are rate design and policy discussions because in the end of the day, we have the same amount of customer cost pools that we have. So the cost doesn't change. It's the denominator that we use to develop the cost per unit. And if we're going to say that we want to develop a secondary meter fee, we'll have to discuss and establish what costs are truly redundant and which costs are there no matter what for each individual meter.
Okay. And what I heard you say is that it's kind of a policy call on our part. And if we decide that there are some customers that we think are having less of an impact, you could help us calculate, for example, a secondary meter fee on a property or a second or more. So it's kind
Right.
of
It kind of goes with that argument that I live 2 miles away from a substation while I live next door to a substation. Should I pay the same customer fee or demand charge because I'm a different distance and I have less poles between me and the substation? Again, for rate setting purposes, we develop groups of customers that are homogeneous in nature and develop cost per unit of service. It doesn't matter if our residential home is a mile away from a level of service or 200 feet from a level of service. It has 5 poles, 20 poles. It would be very arduous and time consuming and costly for you to develop a customer specific rate, not something that we would ever recommend or anybody has ever done. So it gets into the level of granularity and fine tuning of what kind of a rate that we want to establish and how granular that rate needs to be. So if by policy, we want to dig deeper and say, well, for this type of infrastructure, say, for a secondary meter, we want to have a separate rate. That is something that you can do and assess. It'll just take a little bit more time and rate design effort that you'll have to establish to perform.
And again, for my fellow commissioners, the reason I'm concerned about this is the higher we push the base fees, the more I think this is an issue.
Well, yeah, but we've already identified this issue on the meters, multiple meters, that that's something we're going to address. So I think Sergey answered the question of how he's calculating the meter charge. So it's just going to be what our policy is going forward, how we tweak it. I think hopefully, my opinion is it will be negligible enough that we'll be able to set a policy where if we raise the base rate, it should still not be that big of an issue. My bigger issue for me he talked about the $20 base and then the $10 of it fluctuates. I'm still more concerned about borrowing $4.5 million on 20,000 meters for 24 years when they might only last 15. So that's the kind of cost that concern me more than than 100 meters or 1,000, maybe even not 1,000, 100 or 500 meters out there that we won't get revenue off of. I think there's bigger fish to fry here than the meter issue. Personally, is where I'm going with that. So I think that'll all work out with policy.
Please continue.
So in terms of this is the proposed structure, but it sounds like there might be an interest in a different, so Kevin, did you?
Comment or a question or something?
I just want to make sure that we give Sergey direction on base fee, because really that's a topic we've discussed with staff, but the commissioners need to say, I'm good with these, or I want to raise them or lower them, because it's key really moving forward that you commissioners kind of agree to what you think should be the base fee.
Well, I guess this is the first time we've seen it. I haven't been able to do the math on what the percentage increases
Well,
on the
Jose,
two are. Or-
Sergey kind of said he has some data and some information on different components. Again, I wish we were in a better position, right? The $8 when we took over the utility was not enough at that time. It should have been higher a lot earlier. So we are where we are. I would like to see us close the delta on how far behind cost of service we are gaining ground through each of these rate periods. So I would say that I would suggest we go $1 higher than what he shows here on the base rate and lower the consumption rate a little bit, however that math worked out for him. That's my 2 cents. I would not go any lower on this projected base rates. I think we should probably go $1 higher on the base rate and lower the consumption fee a little bit, percentage wise of what he said he would need to do to make up that delta for the third rate not being there anymore. And the increase in the base rate, the revenue that you get off the base rate. I know that sounds confusing. That's a lot there, but I think Sergey understands what I'm saying. Does that make sense to you, Sergey?
It does. So instead of having a $5 and $3, you want to see a $6 and $4 per year increase. So all in all, we'll end the projection at $46.50 instead of $42.50 by the fourth year.
And I'm exactly the opposite because I view the base fees as regressive. It's a fee for using nothing. And nobody else, we only can do this because we're a monopoly. I think it should be based on the electricity charge.
No pressure, Ken.
So I'm not, the higher we go, the less comfortable I get with these base fees. Cause you end up, again, if somebody's upset about their power bill and they're like, gee, why is my power bill $200? We've now baked in a minimum of $40 that you can do absolutely nothing about. And if you have multiple meters, you might have $120 you can't do anything about.
And there's a slide of comparables to what other utilities, neighboring, and again, we're all different. Not saying that we should frame ourselves after somebody else, but that still keeps us, below some of the other utilities for base rates and other things. And so again, even PSE, you look where PSE, and I hate to even talk about them because it's completely different, than a public utility where they're at. And they've got a lot of issues coming with rate increases because they're not going to comply with CETA, CCA, and a whole lot of things. Their rates could really get crazy before it's all, and natural gas not being available maybe. So long story short, he has another slide that shows our comparables. We're still going to be right where everybody else is at.
Let's let Ken weigh in on here. We're asked for what's our temperature on this, and let's let Ken see.
So I think the principle here is trying to be as equitable as possible. And I hear the arguments about increasing and the arguments about lowering the base rate in proportion to the consumption charge. And I also see that we're still not bringing in enough money because we've got a very ambitious program ahead of us to spend $60 million to try to have a more resilient, reliable system. And it strikes me that there is cost that is appropriately allocated to each meter. And I understand that it might be possible to tweak that. I think that's really discussion that we need to have at a future meeting to look and see if there's any precedent for utilities doing that based on utilization. It scares me, in fact, to consider that once you cross that line, once you make that adjustment for a single customer, how do you then proportionalize for people who have a second meter, but they're only using half the electricity or only a third? And no, you're looking at how many ways do you slice the baby, really? And the other principle I think that we have to recognize is as we make any kind of an adjustment for a particular group of customers, either we're going to fall below our targets for generating revenue, or we're going to have to allocate that back to another group of customers because it's like a zero-sum game. You can't take from one person, or you can't give to one person without having to take from another to wind up equal at the end of the day.
So I know there's a desire to ask a question or make a comment. What I would like to do is let Sergey complete the presentation, let commissioners finish our questions, and we'll go to a little public comment question. Okay. Sergey, please continue.
Okay. So we'll circle back to this, but as Kevin mentioned, at the end of the presentation, we'll need guidance. And is it lower, is it higher, or is it at that level? So then the other portion of the presentation is simply showing you the general service class. The logic here to move these customers is consistent as well, about $5.50 for the first year, and then closer to $3 or $3.50 per year thereafter. Everything else gets recovered through the energy charge proportionally. So you can kind of see the impacts here. No other significant changes are being proposed because there's no tiers and we're not changing the structure itself. Next is the demand class. Here, we're just increasing everybody proportionally across the board. For the small general demand class of service, the average increase gets applied proportionally to all levels of the charges. Similarly, for the large service, the demand service class, we're also applying the increase proportionally at the average increase for the class. There's no differentials. Everybody will see a similar type of an impact. All you're seeing is just an average highlight of the usage. One item to note is that the bigger the classes, the more diverse the usage is. So we're trying to show you the average of the system class, but there is a lot, the standard deviation becomes wider and wider the bigger the class, depending on the nature of the business that is included in that in that category. So then the primary general service, again, no changes to the structure, simply adjusting the rates proportionally with the increase here. Irrigation showing you here. There's only 2 customers or 1 customer, just going by memory, so there's not going to be really an average included here. And then lastly, the interruptible primary schools. And then an aggregated table here showing you all of them together. So again, this is focusing on the basic charge. Sometimes it's nice to have it all side by side. So we're showing you the existing rates for residential, general service, and demand general service classes, as well as the progression moving them towards the recovery of the cost of service phase-in for the basic charges. Similar slide aggregating energy charges. In this case, eliminating the third tier for residential in the outer years. And then demand charges, again, keeping the classes that currently have demand rates, they'll still continue to have demand rates. We're not introducing any demand charges for anybody else. Now, the last item that we wanted to present to you, based on our discussions during the March meeting and prior meetings, is an alternative for time of use rates. Again, this helps incentivize our customers to shift their load, not necessarily reduce their usage from a total consumption perspective, but shift the load to the off-peak hours, reducing the purchase power demand, kind of the demand component of our Bonneville bill, because it is a pretty substantial portion of our overall power costs. Tier 1 costs, but also it can help us potentially have a long-term extended life of our distribution infrastructure equipment if we're able to avoid oversizing certain facilities or replacing those facilities because they can handle more demand because we're offloading that demand to an off-peak time period. It can help us save money or extend our capital plans into a longer duration time period. Now, for this discussion, we are aligning the heavy load, light load time periods with Bonneville, which are as follows. Heavy load hours are currently 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday, excluding holidays. And light load time periods or off-peak periods are 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Monday through Saturday, and all day Sunday and holidays. Now, one item to note is that with the new contract, Bonneville may be changing their definitions. So if you do go this route, you might want to revisit the heavy load definitions at that time. Alternatively, nobody's holding you to tying to these differentials. Right now, we don't have a clear cost driver. This is just to start our customers moving that direction to help us shift load away from peak period time periods to avoid distribution type of loading on our infrastructure. So we are lining up our heavy load, light load, peak off peak periods with Bonneville, but we don't necessarily have to have that in place all the time. In the future, we can revisit these differentials and time periods as well.
So Sergey,
Yep.
does this apply only to residential or is this to all classes?
So this would be you can choose. We prepared a time of use rate for all classes as an option. So on this table, you're seeing the existing rates, and we're strictly focusing on the energy rate component right now. So we have the tiers for the existing rate for residentials and the uniform rates for everybody else. We have the proposed increases for 25 from the prior slides, just aggregated as a relative point of comparison. And then lastly, we have the time of use differential. Now for the differential, to establish a cost basis, we looked at what the price for Bonneville's heavy load, light load shaping charges are, and the differential is 2-to-1 ratio. So we are using Bonneville's load shaping differential from their current system shape load and their current load shaping charges. Using that differential, collecting the same amount of dollars, you'll see that the light load period or off-peak period would be around 7 cents for residential customers. Doesn't matter what tier you're in, it would be the same, 7 cents. And the heavy load period would be around 14.8 cents. So you can see pretty much twice as expensive for the peak period time period. You'll notice the same trend for all other classes. The charges themselves will be a little lower the bigger the class, but the differential will be the same, 2-to-1 type of structured ratio. And this structure is developed to collect the same dollars being currently collected by your existing rate structure.
Oh, it strikes me that other than residential, the other classes don't have the flexibility such as businesses or schools or manufacturing to operate, to shift that to the low demand hours. And that's just an academic point to include anything but the residential in the calculations.
And I guess my thought on it is, it sounds like there's kind of two bases for considering time of use rates. One is to try and reduce the utilities BPA costs, that they have a higher energy shape charge during the high use and a lower energy shape charge during low use. But then when I look at those hours, it's like, okay, who's going to do something after 10 o'clock or before 6 a.m. that they could have normally done? And about the only thing I can think of is like, oh, setting the timer on your electric car, maybe
Oh,
washing your dishes and maybe a
So,
few other things
lots of appliances.
you could set.
You can set the time that it's going to start. And you can wash dishes at night, you
Right.
can wash clothes at night. Those are fairly high demand.
So the BPA savings would be one. I guess the one I'm really interested in is when we're talking about our substations being overloaded at different times a year. So Sergey, you talked about taking the BPA costs. Are you able to look at our local, do we have data that we generate locally that you can kind of make any sort of assumptions about what time of use charges might help us with loads on our substations or other parts of our distribution? Kevin's nodding yes, but
So we're using your specific shape profiles for the system to develop the differentials. We would have to talk to Kevin and staff regarding quantifying the impacts, and those impacts could be delaying the substation project investments from 1 year to multiple years. Because again, the distribution investment component of it is if we're overloading our systems and we can shave our peak, can we save on the maintenance of that system, and can we save on the capital investment of that system? And we would have to make assumptions and discussions with your staff to be able to quantify the cost. We did not do this for that analysis in terms of trying to align what the cost savings would be if we were able to achieve a certain amount of shaping of our heavy load peak.
okay. And I don't know if that's possible to think about before next time. Kevin's nodding a soft yes.
We can
Okay.
look at times to
Okay.
more match our peaks.
Okay. So it sounds like there could be more information on this in the coming meetings. This is just the first introduction. Okay. Please continue.
Okay. Okay, so these are just the time of use alternatives. And as I mentioned, we developed them for every class, but it's up to the board to establish if you want to go this route, number one, and if you do, which classes you want to go these routes. So you don't have to have all of them go to time of use. You can only have one of them or multiple of them go to time of use as well. We did want to show you some relative impacts that you can see for, as an example, residential classes. If somebody did shift their load from, let's say, the average of 60% plus or minus for a typical residential home. Right now, we're showing you what the average bill is for all various heavy load usage profiles. It's all the same because right now there's no time of use differential. So for 1,000 kilowatt hours, any heavy load distribution right now, it would be $133. Keeping the current proposal the same. This is from the slide that talks about eliminating the third tier. The proposed rate would go to $148. Again, there's no time of use in this structure. And then lastly, the third column to the right shows you that if you're able to decrease your heavy load hour distribution from 60% to 50%, you would be paying about $143. So you'd see a $5 savings just rounding there. But if you do the opposite and if you use more, and if you can't shape your load and actually do a lot more, let's say you charge an EV or two during that time period, during heavy load hours, and you go to 70% heavy load, you might see a bill increase up to $158. So there are pros and cons for those who can't shift their load. We'll see a higher bill, just like with the conservation tier structure. And those who can't shift it will see a savings.
Okay.
And that brings us to the end of the discussion. Really, we're looking for feedback. The first feedback we're looking for is that, are we comfortable with that modified scenario, kind of scenario probably number 7 that we're discussing since last meeting that we brought back, the 9 overall system average followed by the 6 3/4 per year. The next policy question is cost of service. Is a phase-in a good approach that we've brought back? And then the last policy question is rate design that includes the basic charges for residential, the elimination of the third tier, and moving towards the cost of service phase-in collection.
Okay. So what I'd like to do now, if it's okay, is just allow public question, public comment, then we can go to deliberation and feedback. Okay. So if we have anybody online or anybody in the room that'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please say your whole statement and then we'll respond to what we feel like we can respond to. And please keep it to 3 minutes. So does anybody want to make a comment or ask a question? Yes, sir.
Well, just two.
If you don't mind identifying
Yes, sir.
yourself.
Phil Lusk, District 1. Did I get through that in my 3 minutes now? Okay.
3 minutes, fire away.
Yeah, but just two quick comments here on the multi-metering at the home. And my belief as a former utility executive, this was a customer's decision, okay? If the utility had requested that meter, that location have 2 meters, it's the utility's responsibility. But historically, everything on the customer side of the meter is related to the customer. And once again, but in the interest of equity as a customer, you know, at my former job, we helped customers that wanted to relocate and centralize to a single meter. And there may be opportunities, okay, where perhaps a crew may be available to assist a customer, okay, in a transition to a reduced number of meters at their location. But once again, you know, this is a customer's problem, and I empathize with the customer because of a decision that a previous owner had made. But on the other hand, it's not the utility's problem, okay? You have other problems to deal with. Now, we spent a lot of time working on time of use rates, okay? And the one thing I learned is that it was an absolute waste of time given Bonneville's rate structure, because like Frogger, there was no place to jump to for the average person. And when you consider the age demographic, okay, of Jefferson County, if you're going to convince Grandma Ellis, okay, she's going to wake up at 11 o'clock in the evening to do her laundry, okay, when she's historically done it 7 o'clock in the morning on Mondays. You know, these were the kinds of things that we ran into, and a lot of staff time was spent explaining, promulgating, and basically found out that at the end that there was no real go forward there. Now, what I liked was the general manager's suggestion, if you could decouple from Bonneville's rates, okay, and figure out where your cost centers were and align that time of use, then you'd be more like a regulated utility, say in California, where they have morning peaks, afternoon peaks, and the customer is well educated that when they go and avoid using electricity at those peaks, when they're going to get the cost savings, okay? Now, that may be a workable solution. And my last comment is, you know, I sent you the commissioners and staff, okay, my own opinions, okay, I believe that, you know, ductless heat pumps, okay, and especially, you know, believe that what the efficiency program has with the allocation of the Climate Commitment Act money is an excellent opportunity, okay, to get what I think is a ground-changing technology into the hands of the people that can afford it least, and unfortunately are still the ones using electric resistance heating for their primary heating source, although they likely supplement with wood as well. And quite honestly, you know, the world is in flux right now because of tariffs and all the rest of this. But in the long run, I believe that in the interest of the utility, especially given the dynamics, okay, of the regional power grid and Bonneville's, the federal power system, great deal of flux due to climate change, okay? The FCRPS is not operating as it did 40 years ago. Great deal of variability, risk involved, okay? Then we add the stuff going in the region with the data centers, okay? Great deal of uncertainty. This goes back to our quickest and cheapest resource is energy efficiency. And I would just urge the commissioners and staff, okay, once again, you've got an excellent person coming in to head up your conservation program, and that you get out and you really work in promoting ductless heat pumps and heat pump water heaters to your low-income residents and find ways to make it affordable to them, even if it winds up being subsidized or incentivized 100% to get that into their domicile. You would achieve, okay, perhaps by my speculations, okay, maybe a 13 megawatt average drop, okay, in your peak demand when the temperature drops, probably even higher at lower temperatures, okay, 23 and 5 degrees.
And fill your time.
Yes, sir. But thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to be involved with your process. Thank you very much for your considerations today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody else with questions or comments?
Quick comment, first of all, I'm highly impressed with all the attention to fixed and variable costs. I know from my previous lifetime, impacts on others and how you run the business is extremely important. You're doing an incredible job. So I'm the already identified individual who has had the multiple meter issue. I didn't ask for them. I didn't want them. I didn't know they were going to cost me what they're costing me now. And I also realize you have to be fair to everyone. My question is, if there are 3,000 customers who have been identified as residential with multiple meters, what's the big N? In other words, how many total residential customers are there?
Please continue with all your questions and comments. We're not going to do a back and forth.
Oh, I see. So I'd like to know that number, because if it's 3,000 out of 30,000, there might be an impact that's really significant. If it's 3,000 out of 90,000, it's a lesser impact in terms of if there had to be an adjustment made. I also, hoping against hope, there might be a way to identify the fact that there are meters that don't need to be in use, but the cost of changing that, it would be a wonderful service if there could be a way to get rid of the meters that didn't cost a homeowner $10,000 to try to save $7,000 over the next 10 years. That's it. One question, but appreciate the work you're doing.
And I'll just try and throw out a quick response. We've got about 25,000 residential customer accounts.
20,000.
17,000.
18,600.
18,600. So that would be every meter, right?
That's how many residential meters.
Yeah. So potentially, and you can do the math yourself, if we've got 2,000 to 3,000 of those are on one address,
Oh,
that's the
see.
math.
Oh, okay.
Roughly.
So roughly 18,000, a little bit less.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Phil Stover, you got your hand up. Can't hear you yet.
Muffled.
Talk a little louder.
Just wanted to tag up.
Go ahead.
Okay, just want to talk about time of use a little bit. I think that you need to keep it on the back burner for the substation peaks, just because if the new substation doesn't get done in time or demand gets out of hand, you need to think about rolling blackouts are bad and time of use is good. So just a suggestion.
Thanks for making a concise point. Are there any other hands online or in the room? Not seeing any. Okay, so Sergey, you've got you've got this slide up with direction and feedback. So I guess could you just kind of walk through one at a time the kinds of items that you're looking for feedback on?
Sure. So the first item we're looking feedback is just regarding the overall scenario. Would you like me to bring that table up?
Bring up whatever slide you think is the most helpful to help us remember the issues and give you some feedback.
There'll be a little bit of scrolling. I apologize. So the first feedback is regarding the overall strategy. The strategy that we're able to come up with was for the revenue requirements, 9% overall system, followed by 6 3/4 with borrowing with RUS 30-year terms. This is the first question.
Okay, comfort level with this approach.
I'm comfortable.
I'm comfortable with the caveat of it's going to depend on whether or not we can get the RUS loan, because the amount of interest rate's going to matter, whether or not we get 2 years of interest only matters. So if those things turn out the way we think they will, or better, then I'm comfortable with this. If we're not able to get the financing at a good interest rate or whatever, then these rates are probably not going to be high enough
So timing wise, you've got,
to meet our capital plan.
is the presumption that these rate changes would go into effect in like June or July? Is that the idea, like partway through this year?
That is correct. Our assumption, let me just double check, please, is mid-year of every year. So every July 1st or so is when the implementation would happen.
Right. And then when would we know about, I guess, what are the steps necessary to apply for the financing, and when would we know we'd get it? How would that work?
The process of doing the applying right now, that would be done. We got a little bit more environmental things that we have to do. We actually met with them last week. So that should be, and then it's just a matter. Could take 3 months, it could take 6 months. Do you remember right offhand? They didn't give us an exact time frame though, Kevin, did they?
With,
As far as when they would approve.
The environmental was the hangup, was what I was hearing.
so there's still a lot of work to do on the RUS loan. I believe these rates have to be adopted prior to the construction loan being approved. With the caveat, we can do it similar to like we did last rate study and say, okay, July 1 every year, we do
We
a
touch
small
base.
review to make sure we're on track to what we need.
Yeah.
And that's really what I think we're gonna have to move forward with.
And it seems like the process is you presented a 4-year work plan to us. We basically approved that and the rates are there to support the 4-year work plan. The financing is kind of like, here's our plan A to get financing. And if for some reason that the government wasn't doing those loans or whatever, then we'd have to look for an alternative financing. But that's kind of a what if that we, we don't know at this point. We're
Don't
kind of
know.
going ahead with the best plan
Right.
we have, which is the 4-year work plan, rates to support the 4-year work.
But the constant here, the critical factor is we have to do the capital work. Wherever the money comes from, it might be 7 or 8% versus 3, 4, 5%. That's going to throw these rates all out the window.
Well, and if that happens,
I know.
we
That's what
have the
I just want
opportunity.
everybody to understand. We have to do the capital plan.
Okay.
It is what it is. We're going to have to borrow how many millions?
So to keep, I'd like to keep us moving.
Yeah.
So
And these rates are going to have to repay those loans.
it sounds like we're as comfortable as we're going to get with this slide right now, correct? Okay, please proceed to the next feedback point.
Okay, the second feedback point is about the phases strategy. We're proposing that we don't go 100% cost service right away, and we take the same approach as was taken last time and continue making progress, very, very gradual progress towards cost of service. So tying to the class specific increases based on this slide. So that's the second feedback point.
And I guess the summary on that is everybody's being asked to pay more, but the percentages that people are paying more varies. And are we generally okay with the approach here?
We want it to be fair and equitable. We don't want one class over subsidizing another. I mean, that's always been an argument. Residential subsidizing commercial or commercial subsidizing residential. We want to try and get that as close to equitable as we can. And right now we're out of equity. It's
So
imbalanced.
Are we okay with their approach?
Anything that moves us closer to the equity, the
Well,
better.
I think you're okay so far. Keep going.
Okay. The next piece of it is regarding rate design. So specifically here for residential is a discussion about basic charges. We started with $5, went to $3 per year. There was some preference when we discussed going maybe $1 higher, another preference going $1 lower. So we need to kind of a general consensus regarding the residential rate design first.
And then also this is the rate design with eliminating the third tier.
Right. I was going to take it one at a time, but we can couple it together. Yeah.
So we have this slide. Are we generally okay with this approach or do we want a different approach?
I think I made mine clear earlier. I'd like to see a little bit
Higher on the base.
a little higher in the base, a little lower on the consumption costs, and we're going to evaluate every year. We can tweak it as we go. I know the argument will be, well, then we can go with this and tweak it a year from now. Well, I hate to go a year and find out it was a year that we lost ground. So that's my only concern.
And my feeling is that putting the increase as this is presented, putting the increase on the basic charge spreads that out over a whole year as opposed to loading it more on the consumption charge, which increases for the low income residents, how much they pay during winter months when they really need to use the electricity. And that seems to me to be a greater burden if we load it more on utilization than on a service charge, which is 12 months of the year.
So you support what's up here now?
Short answer is yes.
Okay. So I think, Sergey, this is probably as good as it's gonna get. And I guess one thing I would ask staff is if the board could be provided a copy of this. So if we want to send us the digital version of this presentation,
It was sent out
Yeah,
yesterday.
it's in the packet.
okay,
I'll resend it out to you, but
it's in the packet.
it's
I don't
Yeah.
think it's in,
not in
okay,
the packet, but I did.
It's
email
not
the
in the
commissioners
packet.
I did email the commissioners on Monday.
okay.
We did.
Thank you for letting us know we have access to that.
And we'll
Um,
put it on the website.
So if we want to do some math, we can do some math, but okay. So I guess this is, I think we're okay with this now. Dan would like to see the base charges higher. I'd like to see them lower, but I guess we'll say this is okay for now. Please continue.
Then the next one go ahead.
That third, I guess I'd like to see what the 3-tiered rates would be if we wanted to collect the same amount of money on the residential, if that's not a big deal to provide that, if it's a big deal to provide. I just would like to see what the numbers are to know why we're getting rid of it. And I can kind of see where they're going. Is
Okay.
you can do.
Yeah, we can recreate the slide with keeping the current structure of 3 tiers. Mhm.
And okay, and we're proposing to go to the second tier because with the third tier, do this. Okay.
I was in favor of pulling the third tier.
I understand that. I would like to see what the third tier would be. But I think we're okay with this table generally, but it'd be good to have that information because people.
Okay. So I'll just write that down real quick.
Okay. What's the next one?
I think the other classes are pretty straightforward. I don't think we had a lot of discussions there. The main one is time of use. So currently, just a little bit more guidance. Is this something that we want to focus in further? Eliminate classes? What is the guidance about time of use?
Can go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate Mr. Lusk's suggestion that we align it in terms of our peak usage times so that we have the capability now of doing that. And with the smart meters and with the other technologies that are out there for a lot of our customers, not all of them, of course. This can be fine-tuned and work to everybody's advantage.
Yeah, I mean, we saw, you never know when you're going to get that next crazy weather event that's going to drive stuff. And we saw how teeteringly close some of our substations got. So if we could do anything to give them a little more breathing room, I think it's worth looking at what are our local load curves and could we come up, and I think we're just probably talking residential, right?
Yes.
Residential time and use rates that might align with our local loads that might help us a little bit. So I think it'd be worth developing that a little bit more.
Yeah,
And
go
and
ahead.
just for clarification, when we're talking about this item, we're talking about the time periods, not necessarily the cost differential. So we're, instead of defining it based on 6 to 10, we're talking about, we can define heavy load as, let's say, 6 to 10 a.m. and then 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. and everything else in the middle will be either off peak or medium peak. That's what you're talking about.
You guys have the data.
We'll bring something back.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Good.
we can see the data. I don't see any panic to put the time of use in there. I think we can do as much with public engagement and messaging on getting people to understand, when those times are, rather than going to a time of use scale for how we're going to do that and what times we need to do it. Because ultimately, it's about managing the peaks and balancing our load during really those critical times. The rest of the time, I think we're pretty much okay.
Okay.
It's my take on with the information I see coming out of the energy department on our side, showing us, how our usage is 37 to 45 megawatts. It varies. It's very seldom. It's just those certain times of the year, those peaks. That's when it becomes really critical. And I think that's as messaging as much as it would be time of use.
Well, I think we had some real serious impacts where we almost overloaded the system. I think it's worth getting some more information and as well as what the rate differences would be. So I think we need to fully evaluate it. Now, Phil, I know you raised your hand. Did you want to say something new?
Just one last question. Would the rates be mandatory or voluntary? on the part of the consumer.
So the question would be, have you had any thoughts on it being kind of an opt-in structure? It would be a voluntary thing is what staff is saying. You could sign up for it if you wanted to. It wouldn't be mandatory. Any reaction to that?
It's not gonna work, okay? I mean, consumers, once again, just don't want to change, okay, to save $5.
So your point is that you wouldn't have enough participation to make a difference.
Once again, you're gonna spend a lot of staff time, a lot of educational time, okay, to get the consumer ready to accept this, and without mandatory rates, okay, where everybody has to comply, which believes me, okay, it's gonna raise a whole other can of problems. It's not gonna work out because you're just not gonna get, okay, I mean, maybe that's
Okay,
something.
Phil, I'm gonna cut you off here. We have limited time. We have other people.
Consulting could help, okay, find the intersection where voluntary versus mandatory.
Got it. So I guess we're interested in more information. We'll see where it goes.
And Sergey, could you throw the last slide up there that showed the other utilities comparison? There, yeah, that one. So everybody can see it. We're not that far out of where everybody else is at. And I would not even put PSE in that graph personally.
And I would, because that's what we used to have. So there we go. Okay. Any more feedback you need? Or do you have enough?
No, I think that's the direction. The goal is to get the utility in play, the rates in place June 5th. So
Okay.
we'll be working with your staff to come back with updated options.
So we'll have something before June 5th. We'll have another, more final view of this. All right. Thank you, Sergey.
Thank you very much.
With us. Could we take a 5-minute break before we go to BPA? Okay. Take a break for
Thanks, Sergey.
5 minutes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, it is now 3:09. We are bringing our special board meeting back into session, and we have Marcus Perry, BPA here, and this is the last item on this agenda. And then at 4 o'clock, we have a regular meeting. So Marcus, let me just ask you, how long, do you have a presentation for us?
I do. I sent it to you, Kevin.
Uh-oh. We'll figure this out.
We've got the paper. I've got the paper one,
You got a paper one. I don't have anything.
I think. Thought I have it.
Who do we think it went to?
I looked yesterday.
Let's see if we can figure this out.
Minute this morning.
It'd be nice to have it up on the screen.
Yes.
Like earlier.
Can you just resend it? Or Kevin look, or
Yeah, I just,
it's okay. Take your time.
I don't need it.
Where did you find that?
No, I guess I didn't. I thought I
Okay.
had one.
I'm gonna forward it to Will and then we'll bring it up on the screen.
Okay.
You want me
So,
to forward to the commissioners? real quick?
no, just throw it on the screen. Yeah, sure. Go ahead and forward, include us in that too. Then we can maybe look at it after. So how long, Marcus, do you think you'll need to go through the presentation?
I don't know, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes. I can breeze through it. It really is, I'm here to answer questions. I
Yeah.
have materials, but I was hoping more just to get stopped along the way.
Okay.
You have it. It's really high level educational.
Well, and I don't know how much of this is stuff that's been talked about at the
100%.
BPA talks
Exactly.
previously.
Not knowing what your background is, it is very high level. So probably
Okay.
just repeat. And if you want me to do the sign.
Well, and I suspect for us, we're going to be interested in how does this impact Jefferson PUD, going into the future, and the length of the contract, and what we know about what our future reality, how that's going to be different than, say, the past reality. So how we doing, guys? We getting close? All right.
I forwarded them.
So Marcus, maybe you can just start by introducing yourself.
Sure, yes. Feel like I have the camera right here. Talk to, Marcus Perry, I'm with Bonneville Power Administration. I'm the account executive assigned to really this area, Jefferson PUD, Port Angeles, Mason County Utilities, anyway, the general area. Yeah, periodically come out here, talk with Kevin quarterly, and he asked me to come out to do a sort of provider of choice, which is the moniker for the next long-term contract. Just to kind of do an overview, be available to answer questions, because I'm sure you've heard about the contract in many forums. So I just wanted to be that focal point if you had questions. So as I go through this, thanks for getting it up. please feel free to stop me along the way. And if you, I know it's something you guys are on a crunch, just let me move along. No problem.
Yeah, I think our goal is gonna be maybe to take a 10-minute break at the end. So if we could be done by like 3:50, I think that would help keep us as fresh as we can be for the next one, the last leg.
No problem. Are you, who's controlling?
I got it.
Oh, you got, okay. This was legal's contribution to the slide deck, the disclaimer. Basically, this is informational. It's not I'm not interpreting the contract on your behalf. All that good stuff.
Understood.
We just put it in there.
We
Okay.
won't use your name in vain.
Thank you. What I have listed to talk about, little intro to provider of choice, the products we offer, tiered rate design, which is the current rate design we have, moving to PRDM, which stands for Public Rate Design Model. Touch on that a little bit. And then the new contract sections, which sounds like you're interested in hearing about those. Yeah, let's go ahead. Next slide, please.
And I guess you caught a little bit of the tail end of our prior presentation. So that's what we have to do, you know, to think about what rates do we want to set? What messages do we want to send to our customers? What money do we have to collect so we can make the improvements to our system? So that's good for you to see. That's what we strive.
Yeah, do appreciate that. That's what our rate methodology is all about. We're doing it at a different level, but you know, it all comes down. And so it's really interesting to see, you know, sending which signals you want to send and make sure it's reflected in your rate design, which is exactly what we do. One more, please. Okay, provider of choice. This is the, like I said, this is the name we gave to the next contract, the current contract we're operating under. It's called Regional Dialogue. The provider of choice moniker kind of came from Elliot Mainzer's tenure. This is when markets were pretty low and customers were looking, okay, what's, you know, Bonneville, sometimes you're more than market. So what are you going to do to make sure you're, you know, we want to buy from you? And so we came up with this term, well, we want to be in 2028, your provider of choice. So that's where that came from. This contract will start in 2028 and be effective till 2044. Now, that said, we are signing these contracts in 2025. This year, by December, we will sign these contracts. So that it's like a 3-year implementation period before it goes effective.
And Marcus, could you just delineate for the people who listen to this later on, the difference between the rate study that's going on and the rate period versus the contract?
Sure. So the contract kind of just builds the foundation for how we will operate for the next 20 years. But within that 20-year period, we have rate periods where we, every 2 years, we reevaluate our rates to make sure that we're recovering the costs and that the cost allocations are appropriate, all those things. So that every 2 years, we do reset our rates, which will be effective for the following 2 years. But the contract itself just kind of sets the foundation that, you know, it references we will have a rate design, but this is the bigger picture. This is how we, what you're entitled to from the federal system. This is how you add new resources, all these kinds of things that are more global to serving your load, not just the rates.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a 3-year period before they're effective. During that 3 years, it's kind of like implementation. We did the same thing with Regional Dialogue. So you can imagine that there's actually about 16 years of actual contract activeness once 2028 before it expires. The 3 products we offer, and we'll touch on this a little bit: load following, slice block, and block. And there's variations of block. And I'll touch on each of those. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry. Okay, so when we set up the policy, the provider of choice policy and the contract development, we stuck to several principles. I just threw them up here. You know, I'm not going to go through them all in the interest of time, but just call out a couple that are lowest possible rates. Obviously, we try to operate with our lowest cost rates possible and consistent with statute, and keep these products and contracts standardized, which is really important. We have 100 and some odd customers, 120 plus customers. We need some consistency to make sure there's not one-offs, bunch of one-offs everywhere. So that was a goal and a principle: keep everything as standardized as possible. The next slide actually talks about the goals. Again, you can feel free to sift through this, but I'll just call out regionally supported contracts. Number 1, that we bore that out through the public process that we had, which was very robust. We started these discussions really in 2020-ish timeframe, and here we are in 2025, finally wrapping it up. to get the contract complete. Along the way, there was many workshops, many back and forths with customers, comment periods and whatnot, to develop where we are today. We feel pretty good about where we are and that it is a regionally supported contract and rate design for that matter. The other one call out is number 4 there, contracts offer customers flexibility to invest in non-federal. That's important. We heard that loud and clear from customers that they want to help possibly develop their own non-federal. And so we wanted to make sure the contract allows for that integration to happen. And so that was, made it a goal of the contract.
And then the numbers changed from what to what? That previously we could develop X amount of new power locally, and now under the new contracts, we'll be able to do.
Well, so you can still develop whatever you want. There, we just have sort of
Without affecting your
Correct.
tier allocation.
It
That's
used
the
to be anything 200 kW less, we didn't care about. Now we actually raised that to a megawatt or less.
Okay.
We don't need to know. Now we don't care about. We don't need to know about it for the contracts.
And is that per project so you could have multiple 1 megawatt,
For $9.99. Yeah.
$9.99?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you could. You have a bunch of solar arrays that are less than 1 megawatt. You would not have to inform us.
Okay. And we're talking about this 4 or 5 megawatt inline water generation project, but has there been discussions about the increasing that being used to increase or offset and increase load from presumably electric charge ferries at some point? So we've been talking to you guys about that.
Loop me in from the get-go on that project. Yes, and so we actually, with this new contract, there's an allocation we call the tier 1 non-federal resource allocation. You get up to 5 megawatts where you can essentially add we call it a SNER, a small non-dispatchable resource, which this would qualify. So you got a 5 megawatt allotment where we will just let you add it to the contract. It'll offset tier 1.
It will or will not?
It will offset tier 1, but we don't make you purchase support services that you would be required to purchase if you were bringing a non-federal on, like shaping services and things like that. We say, okay, you get 5 megawatts to do what you want with, and we won't add these extra costs. So if that's one resource, that's 5 megawatts. Okay. If it's 4 resources that are 1.25, then that's you get 5 megawatts nameplate to deal with. And so this one would fall into that if you wanted to use it all for that 5.
But we're gonna then lose 5 megawatts of our tier 1?
No. Your contract high water amount will remain. It's just that within you'll just be offsetting load. So you have essentially you won't be using it.
Okay.
You'll have it available for.
It's not changing our tier 1 allocation. That was my main concern. Okay.
It's not. Nope. Yeah. Non-federal resource integration. We can talk more about that too. Number 6, contracts are straightforward and implementable. That's important. And I don't know how often we achieve that. We try to, again, trim down language, keep everything as sort of, standardized as possible. But these contracts are still going to be like 40 pages or so. But we do feel good. We have eliminated some of the reporting requirements and things that put more onus on the utility. Like we didn't really use that during RD, kind of a lessons learned. Purchase periods are going away. Certain elections are going away. So it's meant to be easier for customers to implement, not just one. Okay, next. So those were the goals and principles. Now we're going to move to what can you choose? What are the products that we ended up with? Load following. This is the product that Jefferson currently takes. This is where Bonneville is responsible for meeting your hour or your load on an hourly basis. Kind of the set it and forget it. Let Bonneville be responsible for meeting your peak load obligations. We do, that second bullet is we do allow you to add non-federals. It doesn't exclude that, and we do have options for above high water load service. But again, this is really the simple. Let Bonneville take care of it. The next product, we call planned products. Block and slice block. We still serve these utilities net requirement. We just do it on a forecast basis. So not in real time like we do for load following, where we meet your load every hour. For block and slice block, we have their net requirement, but we on a forecast on an annual basis, and we give them kind of a block, a block of energy, and it can be shaped, but it's a block of energy. And they know that from the start of the fiscal year, they know exactly how much they're gonna get from Bonneville. But if we get a cold snap in January, say, Bonneville said, we're only obligated to give you this, you're responsible for meeting your peak load. And so those planned product customers go and are responsible for, securing whatever non-federal or whatever else they have to meet that peak load. It's a much more involved product, more maintenance is required from these utilities to manage that, to make sure that their peaks are being met.
And I think from our perspective, we know we're gonna be load following, right? So I don't think you need to spend much time.
I don't think the small nuke's ready to be dropped in here.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Even if it's a load following customer, you can still add a resource.
Right.
It just takes that obligation on to Bonneville. Then quick note, you can change, we're including an option to change your purchase obligation, like a one-time right. We had this in regional dialogue. And actually, I think somewhere around 7 or 8 customers actually changed the product within the contract. So we have, 7 or 8 customers that started with a different product that they're going to end with. So we did have a date in the contract originally, in the RD, it was 2016, but we realized we're getting all these requests kind of one-off even after that. So we're like, okay, let's just make it a one-time change at any point given certain notification requirements. So so we're still going to carry that forward.
But this gets at that issue of, boy, this is a long contract, and boy, everything's changing right now with power. It gives us a little more flexibility that if things really get uncomfortable, we could change products.
You have an option to,
Okay.
it's a one-time
deal. One time.
but yeah, it's essentially what customers ask for.
Yeah.
It's an off-ramp, an opportunity to change their product. And
Right. I think that helped the comfort level.
sell it, yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, we had it before. This is just more flexible than what was written in the contract. Next slide, please. Yeah. New contract section. So this is what I think you were kind of getting at earlier. There was a lot of standard contract language that was rolled over, but there are new sections that are going to be added simply because these things didn't exist in the regional dialogue.
Right.
Section 22, or what will be Section 22, WRAP, Western Resource Adequacy Program. This is a regional effort to make sure utilities are resource sufficient to meet their loads on a forecast basis. This program didn't exist, like I said, in regional dialogue. We are adding language to add the roles and responsibilities for customers to take on. And as a load following customer, you essentially, Bonneville does that on your behalf. So again, another set it and forget it. Planned product customers, they are their own WRAP entity and they are responsible for meeting these requirements on their own. It's another difference.
Could you talk a little bit about, again, we're going to be load following. So how does that change what Bonneville is going to be doing year to year, or how might that change our costs? Because it seemed like from what I've heard about it is it's making you be responsible for your forecasting and so forth, and having enough reserves, and that you can call on others to help you. If maybe you can explain that. When could we call on others in the Western Resource area to help us, and how might that be different than in the past?
Yeah, and I'm not the WRAP expert, but there's different periods of time that there's like a forward showing period where you have to show that you are resource sufficient. So all along the way, we are planning. And I don't know. I think it's like I don't know what the percentile is we're planning to, but things happen that go beyond those. So in those situations, if we get there, we want to see the pool of resources available to help, so that we don't have blackouts in the Northwest. That's what this program was set up to kind of help prevent those from happening. Make sure everybody isn't just relying on a Bonneville or somebody to come rescue them. We need to know in advance if you need help, and then there's this sharing opportunity for a price. It's not free, but it just so we can prevent these sorts of kind of catastrophic things from happening. There's a lot more subject matter expert folks on WRAP than me, but that's the idea behind it, is to make sure that we have resources to meet.
And the idea being, again, if you had that January 15th weirdness happening, that ideally somebody else in the Southwest power pool is not going to be subject to the same conditions and would have more resources to share. That's kind of the idea, right?
It's more regional, just like Southwest Power Pool. It's more Northwest focused.
Okay.
Yeah. So, that would be the idea, is that there's resources in the Northwest. People can, there's a pool to draw from if you need it. Puget has some available. You can, oh, I need some of that. Bonneville has some capacity available. Okay, we'll tap into that. It's really, again, trying to prevent something bigger from happening in the Northwest. But so in the contract, there's going to be a section on section 22 about RAP. For load following, it's not very, it just kind of says Bonneville is going to be doing this on your
Right.
behalf, kind of thing. If there are resources, we may have resource information we'll require from you, because we're obligated to show what resources we have in our footprint. And so if that means you guys have a resource, we need to put that information in for our forward showing and whatnot. So
Okay.
there may be additional requirements from there, informational requirements that we'll have. And obviously the cost of participation will be in the rate design itself. It's not specific to you guys per se. It's
Right.
rolled into the rates.
Right.
Next section, please. Day ahead market, another one that didn't exist in regional dialogue, and honestly, we still haven't formally made a decision on this one. So right now, we're putting some kind of placeholder language in the contract that just says, hey, if and when we make a decision on this, we're going to need some implementation period. We're not sure what that's going to do to the power sales contract, but we will readdress it. We'll convene a public process when that happens to see what other provisions or whatnot we need to add to the contract. So it'll be placeholder when you guys sign the contract, and so it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out once we make a decision, which we haven't formally yet. So
yeah,
I don't have a lot to say more on that one.
Okay.
And the other new exhibit that's going to pop up is Exhibit J, which is kind of more informational. Customers, we saw under regional dialogue, especially towards the end, particularly storage devices were starting to proliferate a little bit more. People are, more than just piloting projects, they're actually trying to implement these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Bonneville's not sure what this means to us, the influence is going to be. So we're adding sections like section J to talk about information we need from customers on their resources, because we need to be able to monitor this stuff too and see how it does interplay with our system. So it really is informational. Batteries is the example that comes to mind. It tells how you're going to use the battery, the ramp rates of these batteries, that kind of thing. Really just informational. We're not assessing any costs.
Right. But if somebody puts in something like a microgrid related storage or whatever we're doing, let you know.
Let us know.
Okay.
Again, it's more information. We want to see how it affects us, if
Okay.
at all. And if you get enough of these going, there is going to be some effect. So we need to be able to just see, aggregate it up. And so this Exhibit J helps get us there.
Hey, Curtis, come on in.
Those are the three really new sections. If you go to the next slide. If you're looking for, in the interest of time, we do have a couple of documents here that these are linked. So if you have PowerPoint, you can click them. They'll take you to our homepage, which has, especially that comparison to regional dialogue, which I think you were talking about. It's pretty dense. There's a lot of, we go section by section, and there's not necessarily a lot of changes in each, but it does give you a sort of a version to look at, if you kind of a quick and dirty. Okay, section 5, what does that look like in provider of choice? There's not a ton of changes necessarily, but you can actually see inside what's been going on. I think the sections I called out are the new ones that you might be interested in. Everything else is same in terms of the contract section. The wording might be a little different, but it's not a wholesale change like the ones I just went through were. So feel free to click those links. The next slide, big tenet of what we did continue over was the concept of the contract high watermark. If you go to the next, this is the contract high watermark is the demarcation point between tier 1 and tier 2 rates. Tier 1 being our lowest cost power. So the contract high watermark will be carried over, not the number, but the concept of the high watermark will be carried over. If you go to the next slide, talk a little bit more about the calculation itself. these are the components of how we're gonna determine the contract high watermark. We're gonna have a starting point, a base allowance. There's subtraction and there's additions in there depending on each utility's situation there. That will be formula or go into the formula and determine what the contract high watermark is. As you're going through that, does anything stand out to you that you have a question about?
Questions?
The new specific resource adjustment, what exactly does that refer to?
That refers to utilities that added resources under regional dialogue. We called them new specified resources. So we give them I think it's 25% or 50% of that resource they get as high watermark. They get will be transferred over as high watermark. If that makes sense. That's where that came from. And so we didn't give them the full amount. We gave them a percentage of it because we, again, want to encourage new resource development as well. So yeah. Yeah, go to the next slide. This is a fictitious customer, not even a fictitious example of how those pluses and minuses would work. You start with the base, 100 average megawatts. You go through the different components of the formula there, and then at the very end, you end up with this high watermark. For this fictitious example, it's 105. So you started with the base allowance of 100 average megawatts, and you did all these things throughout regional dialogue. The aggregate effect actually increased their high watermark, didn't increase high watermark. It increased their PF eligible load to influence their high watermark to 105 when they started at 100. Conservation is a big one. You know, we did grant for self-funded conservation. If you achieved 10 average megawatts, well, we gave you credit for 5. We added 5 to your high watermark. Same with like I said, the new resource. You didn't get the full new resource. You got a portion of it, but it did increase their high watermark. So high watermark. Next slide is the where we. Oh, I forgot about this. Subsequent adjustment categories. There were policy decisions made that had, outside of the formula, we had contract adjustments that we agreed to. I'm thinking of the economic adjustment was one for utilities who looked at 2023, which is the base year we looked at, and said, oh, I had a big industry down. That's not fair. So we said, okay, well, we'll do this economic adjustment. We'll monitor it, see if it comes back, and whatever it comes back in the next year, we'll give you credit for that. So there's adjustments that we did do along the way. Subsequent, the new utility would be another category. Tribal was another category. But there was one category that I did want to talk to you about in the next slide, because it does directly or could directly affect you all. And that's that bottom 2.4.2.6 Port Townsend paper. Port Townsend paper is a DSI, direct service industry. For Bonneville, it's not a requirement that we offer them a contract. Their contract also expires in 2028, their current contract. So in the event that Bonneville does not offer them a contract, we put this carve out that we will, engage a public process, public discourse to determine if there's an opportunity to move or to essentially increase Jefferson's high watermark, so you all can absorb that load, assuming it's not a new large single load. But that was the carve out. Again, that's not a we will do this. It is we will discuss this, but we didn't want to. If it wasn't in the policy, we wouldn't have a lot of legs to stand on. So it's in there. So if that happens, then we can.
How do we know, or what do you know about the process? And I realize that's Port Townsend paper in Bonneville. It's not Jefferson PUD. We're not at the table for that discussion. But is there any discussion going on about that, or?
Well, so their contract technically runs to 2028.
Yeah.
They at any time can come to Bonneville and ask to renegotiate a contract, or to have another extension or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know if that's happened yet. I don't think it has, to my knowledge, but they can. And and if that happens, then we will go through for any DSI, which unfortunately we only have the one left, but we would have to do an equivalent benefits test, an EBT, which determines if it's in Bonneville's interest, Bonneville and its ratepayers' interest, for us to offer another contract to the DSI. So we'd have to run that analysis and see where that plays out. And if it says no, then we won't, which could trigger this adjustment to come into play. Or if we do offer them, then, you know, this just sits throughout regional provider of choice period. And if at any point, we you know, because their contracts, I don't think are 20 years. I think they're like 10-year contracts.
So you're not the point person with the Port Townsend paper mill. Okay.
But one alternative here would be if they ran it out, they could go on the market and wheel through your transmission. Is that one of the options they would have? I mean, what are the restrictions if they weren't able, if you weren't allowing them to get that firm power, or, you know, they didn't want it, they wanted to do something different? Just curious, we're trying to know how it could impact us and what their options would be.
Right. So I can't imagine them wanting to necessarily go to market, but if they did, yeah, they could essentially have their power provided.
And they'd wheel through your transmission.
They'd have to pay for that transmission.
We would still be outside of their relationship with you then.
Well, it wouldn't be with us anywhere other than the transmission piece. If they're
Right, the wheeling part of it, yeah.
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, we'd still, transmission would still be involved, but power itself would not be involved. They would be purchasing it from wherever, which is a very complicated scenario, honestly. That's why I think we wanted this carve out for Jefferson, you know, in that situation, to at least have the ability to talk about it and see if there's.
So then the idea would be that this would happen sometime before 2028, if that was triggered. And would we then be involved in those discussions? This is kind of hypothetical.
It would be
but-
public discussion, so yeah, to that extent, you come to the workshops and
Okay,
voice your opinion on it.
okay. Kevin, did you have anything to say about this one, or?
It's good it's in there.
Yeah,
Very beneficial to us.
yeah. I mean, and I met with previous mill management, and I actually talked to one of their guys today because he was at the EDC meeting, and he said that they haven't been affected by the tariffs. Originally they were going to be, but there's an exception now. But you know, they're just busy trying to keep that thing going, you know, and it does affect our community in a big way. If it were to shut down, it would be a lot of jobs lost, and it would have ripple effects upon our healthcare provider, Jefferson Healthcare. And we realize they're kind of a one-off, but I appreciate this too. So whoever, you know, pushed for this to be in there.
Yeah, no, it was good. We heard from the utility, Jefferson PUD, and yeah, we heard from the mill itself directly, but you know, strongly in the comments when we were developing the policy. So it was really good to hear. And like I said, you know, I would help develop some of this language, I guess. But yeah, I think it's necessary. It's our last DSI.
Well,
I think you have more of a leg to stand.
I mean, in some ways, it's kind of like these utilities that made the argument that they paid for their own energy conservation. Okay, fine. You've done this. Let's create a carve out. Here we've got this one direct service that's still here. It's still producing jobs. It's still working. You shouldn't just say, oh, you get zero. Tough luck, you know. So anyway, okay.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to point out that exists for you guys, or for, you know, above content. Okay, so
Well, let me ask one more question. Was there any serious pushback on that? Did that really
no,
get?
it actually got some support
Okay.
from in a public meeting. I know for sure. I think it was NRU.
This is Joel Marcus, I'm counsel, and just to refresh everyone's recollection, I mean, we were involved in working with BPA, which we appreciate, Marcus, to get this language inserted so that because the mill was busy doing other things, and we wanted to preserve at least some sort of option on their behalf to avail themselves of BPA's transmission. But it sounds like if they don't do anything, their contract ends in 2028. Is that right?
Yeah, we would reach out before that happened.
Obviously, and I think we have, you know, the PUD has an interest in facilitating all that, but they actually have to do something before then.
True.
Okay, thanks.
And Kevin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but we know you've dealt with the mill and other stuff. They had some power interruption issues where they were thinking that trees were affecting their power supply. When you had those conversations, did you talk about this at all?
Not during those conversations, they were different. We have had conversations with the mill, this group on contract. It seems like they have, some more pressing problems right now, but I do think this is something they will address in a short amount of time.
They know it's on the horizon. They know they're gonna.
I can reach back out to them and say, hey,
Okay. Well, I'm glad we're talking. I'm glad this is in there. That's good.
It is good. And their account executive that for the mill, I know he's good. So
Okay.
it's not gonna be lost on him that this window is, we're getting 2025, got a couple more years left, but I think he wants to, settle it as sooner than later.
Well, I don't know what appropriate level of communication there would be between you and him, but knowing that you both are serving one geographic area, it's appreciated to the extent you can, be talking to them, because your agency collectively impacts us, even though it's two different programs, two different contracts, and it's in our collective interest to try and have as much harmony as possible and not big interruptions in service, not big impacts to cost if possible.
Yeah, and I think you're right. If we did go down the path of needing to trigger that language, you guys would have to be involved at that point. And again, I think the big thing there is it cannot be a new large single load. I think.
Right.
Okay. So as long as it's under 10 average megawatts, we could consider,
Do we know what they are?
They're
Yeah.
larger than that, aren't they?
yeah, that's
19?
right.
That's where they're at.
Well, they have a resource that offsets some of their loads. It's a little nuance there. It is over currently. It looks like it's over, but market conditions can change. We can talk more about that later, but that is a consideration. But new large single load.
Okay.
It could be iffy. Above contract high watermark load service. Most people refer to this as tier 2. We are going to establish the contract high watermarks next spring for provider of choice. And once we do, there's a 60-day clock that starts where utilities need to tell us, okay, how are you going to serve the above contract high watermark
Right.
load? This is because we need to plan. If you go to the next slide, I think it's the next one. These are the options you have available to you. You can set it for all tier 2 from Bonneville if you want it long term. You can kind of mix it up as kind of alluded to earlier. You can have a fixed amount of non-federal and the rest long-term flexible from Bonneville, or you can flip it. You can fix the amount of long-term you buy and then have your own non-federal serve your above high watermark load, or you can go all flexible. There's the next slide is a sort of.
So long-term is for the length of the contract? Is that what's considered long-term, is the 20-year term?
Yeah, so you make an election. So the idea is long-term, meaning we go out and make a purchase for the long term because we can get a better rate than in the short term, or we develop a resource or something. That's what I meant by long term.
Okay.
Yeah, and so there's the A, B, and C all had long term in them, but it's just the amounts of long term that you'd be purchasing. If it was the first option A, you would be purchasing all of your above high watermark load from us. B or C, you could purchase some from us and have your own, and just the amounts of each of those would change.
So, and then we have to make that decision again by,
It would probably be around next June.
and then do we have a feeling for what you'd recommend at this point?
We don't have any generation that'll be coming up that soon.
If you look closely, it's an attractive to go to one of the combos where BPA does some stuff and maybe maybe review some stuff. Right now, I would recommend we have Bonneville Power do everything.
Yeah, A. We would be an A at this point by the,
But I think you could save a few dollars, at least the way the market looks now, if you went with one of the other options.
But would that mean we'd be adding somebody to buy power on the market for us? Would that be a new person? we'd
Not-
have to add?
So that would be, if you're making a market purchase or if you're developing a non-federal resource, I think it would be different scenarios there. Like that second bullet, there is still opportunities if you get, 5 years in, you're like, actually, we want to develop a resource. That we will allow, again, more of these functionality in the contract. You can supplement one-time election, assuming we haven't made a long-term purchase on your behalf, because there could be some stranded costs that we would have to assign. But if in the scenario we didn't, then we could reduce your amount and you can bring on that non-federal now. So
So I'm realizing time check, we're at 3:46. I don't know if we can
we're not getting through this.
move us along
Yeah. I think
or hit the, whatever highlights you want to hit. Yeah.
we're actually almost done. Actually, I'll just go to the last slide then. The ones in between this and the last slide are just, rate design. We're coming up with a new rate design. Yeah, if you keep going. These are, I don't know. Take time to look at these. If you have questions, let me know. This isn't even final yet. PRDM will be final in May. So this is really just our rate methodology. I talked, your presentation before was talking about how you guys are doing it. Well, we did it too. We came up with a rate design methodology for our utility customers. If you go one more, this is, one more. This should be a timeline. Sorry. There we go. Okay, this is, I think is pretty important. This is where the dashed line is where we are right now, kind of that May period. You see what we've accomplished up to now, which is all the policy, all the templates are mostly done. We had the comment periods. We have one more workshop on May 21st to review what we heard in that last comment period. But that's it. And then in June 18th, we are going to finalize. We're going to publish the contract templates. So between now and June 18th, that's where we need from our utility customers, we need to get the request for offer, which I know Kevin's aware of, that you have to ask Bonneville for a contract. It's a simple letter, just says, hey, we want a provider of choice contract and which product you guys want to elect. That has to be to us by June 18th.
And does that include that option we were just talking about, the tier 2?
No.
That does not include that. Okay.
That comes after we actually tell you what your high water mark is.
Okay.
This is really just to get you a contract.
Okay.
So that's why I'm glad, we still got about a month and a half, but we definitely need that letter sooner than later, because once June 18th hits, we're going to publish those the templates, and we're going to start churning out, for our 100 and whatever customers, we got to develop a specific contract for each of them. So we're going to start, staff is going to be just working.
So Kevin, do you need more feedback from us before you can generate that request to Bonneville?
What we'll probably do is bring Marcus back, give him a little more time, and then discuss the letter. We know we're gonna be load following. We know we're gonna do these things. The letter is it just has to be done, but the board needs, I think, to be in a meeting like this and say, yes, send the letter. If Joel recommends, we could do it through a resolution.
I suspect we could probably handle it at a regular meeting, because it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like there's really big options that we have to consider. Seems like we kind of know what we need to do.
And it simply is a request for offer. You're not signing the contract or anything at this point. It's just tell us, we need to prepare these, what do you want, product wise? So we can, in late August, early September, that's when we'll give you the customer Jefferson specific contract for you guys to review and sign by December. So this letter, I don't know what formalities you guys need to go through, but
I would think that we've probably done it today, that we could, on a consensus basis, just direct you and Joel to work up whatever draft letter you think is appropriate and get it to us in a packet at the appropriate time. That seems acceptable.
I do know Bonneville Power like it as soon as possible.
Yeah, so I'd say whatever you need to do, draft it up and get it in front of us at a future meeting. Yeah.
That was my goal for this meeting.
Yeah, I think so.
We got it right at the 10 till mark.
Yep.
Yeah, that's I think that's a nice way to end it right there.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Questions for Marcus? I mean, it seems like quite a journey. And how's the year looking so far with snowpack and so far today? Yeah.
I think water's below average. It's been a below average water year. We've actually had a decently orderly flow runoff. It's already started. Runoff's already begun, but we had some warm weather, but we also had some chilly nights. So we would get the runoff during the day, and then it would cool down enough, especially in the mountains where it was still, closer to freezing, that we've had a kind of measured runoff, which is good because it gives us a chance that we'll have some power for some water in late July when, you know, prices go way up. Yeah, I think it's coming in somewhere around, I don't know, I think it was like high 80s percentage wise of average, 80 something percent of average. Still below average, and we're coming off some pretty low, lower than average water. So it's definitely improved from where we started the water here. But yeah, yeah, about 80 something percent at this point, 88, I think.
So not too bad.
With the Columbia Treaty still in flux, did the Canadians restrict their water some to give you that flow? Was there a concerted effort between two countries, or is it just what you spoke about, all what's on our side of the border? As far as,
So that's
far
no,
as the
that's
flow.
that include, we look at the whole basin.
Okay.
Which includes the Canadian mountains, mountain ranges, and yeah, even their snowpack was actually a little down this year. So no, that's the whole water year we're projecting. It includes what's going on.
Any other questions for Marcus?
I appreciate you coming in and he's a big help.
I would say that thing on the mill, that's the biggest new information for me.
Yeah.
So that's good news. And that's a done deal. That's in the rules
The policy.
or in the policy right now. Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oops. Yeah, happy to do it.
Thanks for making
Love
the
coming out here, especially when I can wear sunglasses.
Yeah, you don't get much of this is pretty much a top 10 day for us. It's really nice out. All right, well, thank you, Marcus. So we have reached the end of our special meeting agenda. It is 3:53. We're gonna adjourn this meeting and then come back at 4 o'clock for our regular meeting. All right, thanks everybody and see you at 4.
Good to see you, Marcus.
Thank you.